Okay, so that was probably the longest break of your collegiate career thus far. And now we're going to go into a historical overview of sociology because it's a relatively new discipline. And to understand sociology as it was studied today, it's really important to understand the different social movements that were the foundation upon which we've developed over the last 2.5 centuries as a discipline. While sociology is a fairly new discipline in comparison to the hard sciences like biology, chemistry, and physics, its evolution can be traced back to the scientific revolution um, and then forward through these other three eras. And so we're going to take a look at we're going to take a look at each individual era and see how it contributed to the development of sociology. So, throughout time, humans have pondered the world in which they live. The scientific revolution established the primary methodology and research tools to investigate this world. This era saw the development of a rigid structure for research, which we now know as the scientific method, and the world view that nature could be measured quantitatively using observed data collected in the field or in an experimental environment. This age was critical in developing the way we think about the world around us, even today. Next came the Enlightenment, and this era produced some of the greatest and most influential philosophers of the Western world. Drawing from the works of the ancient philosophers like Plato and Socrates, the Enlightenment philosophers were interested in pondering the nature of the human experience. Throughout history, humans dominated humans by enslaving or conquering them. Many times, a leader was seen to have a divine right of providence over their subjects. The Enlightenment movement is often credited to the French as its founders, which include Voltaire and Rousseau. At the time, they began advocating for social systems based in what the Americans would later coin as an inalienable human right. Their argument included one for studying the social world of humans in the same way natural sciences were studied. They believed that by using the scientific method, a deeper understanding would emerge that would eventually lead to equality among social groups. The third stage of the development of sociology comes with the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, most labor was based in agriculture on small family farms or communal farms. When manufacturing goods shifted from farm labor to factory labor, small towns began to develop into larger towns. This growth was rather slow in the beginning, but as industry and technology progressed, more people began to move from the farm to the factory, which led to urbanization. This is the migration of individuals en masse from rural areas to more populated towns and growing cities. Technology outpaced population growth towards the mid 1800s. Poor farmers packed up and moved to the city where better paying, stable jobs were easily found. This rapid evolution included swift social change, and it is really the period where sociology as we know it today began. The 19th century, we saw Auguste Comte, and he's kind of seen as the founder of sociology, although we don't really call him a sociology. He's a philosopher that's known for a school of thought called positivism, and that's the knowledge based on scientific reasoning and fact. So if we can measure something, then we can say yes, in fact, it exists, and that is knowledge, and that's how knowledge is formed. And he was, I think, the first one to actually say the word sociology. Harriet Martineau was the first female sociologist. She was in Britain at the time, in England, um, and she was the first person that we see in sociology advocating for social justice, not only for women and enslaved people, but other oppressed groups as well. Now, let's think for a second about what was going on in England, especially London at the time. And there was factories all over the place. The Industrial Revolution was just getting going. And you have smog, you have really poor working conditions, for the lower income individuals in London and the outlying areas. And Harriet Martineau and a couple of other people looked at the situation not only in Great Britain but in Germany with Max Weber and said, you know what? No, something is going on here. Something is not right. Why is it that people are giving up their right to be people for the sake of working for minimum wage or barely living wage and working in very harsh conditions? So Max Weber, he's a pretty cool guy, um, and he took a look at Protestantism and how it really helped foster the rise of capitalism. He was into religion, and he said, you know what? We have this thing called the Protestant work ethic, where if you work hard, you're frugal with your money, and you live, a good life, that you'll be rewarded for that in the afterlife. And this Protestant work ethic really is fundamental to the rise of capitalism. Because capitalism, when you think about it, has that same message, right? You can start from nothing and become something. I mean, that's the great American dream. If we look at people like the Carnegie um, of America, the Vanderbilts, um, all of these different American nobility, we would find that they oftentimes were the great American success story. Came to the big city with 5 cents in their pocket and became billionaires because of their hard work ethic. So he also examined formal rationality and bureaucracies. That is in your book, but we're going to go through that in more detail in a later chapter. So I want to just throw it out there for you right now, but we'll come back to it. We also have Emil Durkheim. He's a really good guy. He studied suicide rates in European countries, and he was really the pioneer when it came to methodology in sociology. So he looked at these suicide rates and he figured out, you know what, solidarity is something that holds social groups. It's like the glue that holds social groups together. There's two types of this solidarity. One is mechanical, and that's traditional, and it's based on the bonds of similarity. So we could say that because we are all Americans, we have mechanical solidarity. We have a long-standing history as Americans, and it's all good. We all know the Pledge of Allegiance. We're similar in some ways when it comes to our identity as countrymen. Organic solidarity, however, is modern in that it's industrial. It's bonds based on specialization and interdependence. So where mechanical solidarity is really looking at, we could trace that back to like tribal groups. It's always been. Organic solidarity came out of the need of industry to work dependently with one another. So if I'm a wood producer and I'm making chair legs, and you're a carpenter making chairs, well, obviously there's going to be some kind of solidarity between us. I have a product that you need, and you have a product that I need. We're very specialized in what we do. Karl Marx is probably somebody you've heard a lot about, and he was an economist, and a political thinker, a philosopher, but he's also fundamental in understanding sociology from what we call conflict theory. And he was all about class conflict. I mean, that was how he defined social groups. And he had the bourgeoisie, who owns the means of production. Today, we would probably refer to them as the one percenters. And then you have the exploitation of the proletariat. And the proletariat is the working class, the ones that they were so worried about in England and in Germany with all these big factories. They don't get a big piece of the pie. It's the bourgeoisie that gets the big piece, and they are very small in number, where the proletariat is huge. And because there's this um, distinction between the two groups in living standards, in the amount of resources each held, there's conflict there, and it's just waiting to happen. And when we get into theory, we're going to talk a lot more about that. So we're going to move forward now into the early 20th century, and this is where American sociology really takes hold. Robert Ezra Parks, he came from the Chicago School of Thought. He actually worked with Booker T. Washington at the Tuskegee Institute for a while, and he really was interested in urban sociology, specifically race relations and how it played out. Now, think about it for a second. Tuskegee is in the south, Chicago is in the north. His experiences viewing both of these social groups, the societies that he was living and operating in at the time, gave him a really interesting take on living in these big cities that were becoming even larger as manufacturing really took hold. W.E.B. Du Bois, you've probably heard of him before. He, an amazing scholar, first African American to receive a PhD in sociology, and he did his dissertation, I believe it was. It's called the Philadelphia Negro. And remember, contextually at the time, that was the way the United States classified African Americans. And he went into the what we now refer to as the inner city of Philadelphia, and he studied these individuals and how they operated in the city of brotherly love. And what he noticed is there was a double consciousness that individuals of color, both male and female, experienced, and that is that there was this awareness that they were two separate um, individuals, if that makes sense. First, they saw themselves as Americans. They saw themselves as being a part of this organic group, right? That they were in America. They were part of American culture and society. However, because of the color of their skin and because of the long history of slavery and subjugation, they also experience what they call blackness. And that is the experience of a person of color in the United States at that time. They cannot escape that. There is this knowing, and another scholar later on, um, Bell Hooks would call that the outsider within. So you're in a social group, but you're never fully a part of it, and that's due to racial stigma. And when we talk about race in the following lectures, we're going to come back to Dr. Du Bois because he was really critical, or he's really foundational in understanding the field of critical race theory. So if we move towards the middle of the century, we are talking Robert Merton. He came up with theory of deviance, and that is that when we go against norms, behaviors, and beliefs that are acceptable in society, we call that deviant behavior. And he figured out this whole theory to explain it, and how it manifests, how it develops, and how it actually can be activated for social change. Two of the things that he's most well known for are manifest and latent functions. And when we talk about social systems, social structures, you're going to see these terms again. First off, a manifest function is an obvious and intended function of a given phenomena or institution. So, why are you in school? Well, the manifest function for you being in school is to teach you about nursing or accounting or sociology, right? You got to learn the language. You've got to learn how we do things in the specific disciplines that you want to work in, and that's obvious. That's why you're going to school. But then there's latent functions underneath of that, and they're the functions that aren't recognized or expected. So a latent function of education could be seen as tracking students, making sure that there's always a working class by failing students based on the knowledge of cultural capital, which is the stuff that you know that you didn't really realize you know. And we'll talk about that more later as well. But latent functions, they can be pretty dangerous because it's the hidden stuff, the stuff that we don't realize that's going on. And that's what Robert Merton was really famous for. C. Wright Mills, he should be familiar to you. He's the guy that came up with this idea of the sociological imagination, which is really just being able to look at a situation or a phenomena or someone's life in context of the society and the structures that they live in. Um, he's really cool. I like him because he talks about this power elite. You know, it's corporations, it's government, it's the military, and they're making the key decisions that affect you and I today. And they do this with what Merton would talk called latent functions. There's a reason why we have the laws in place that we do, and it's not just because it keeps everybody safe or it maintains social order. Some of the laws that are out there actually are designed to maintain a large disparity between the social classes. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on too. Why haven't we talked about any women? I'm a feminist. I should be talking about the women sociologists. Well, you know, women and minorities were excluded from universities for the most part until, Title IX came out back in the 70s. I mean, sure, you had women going to school, but they weren't big in numbers. And when they did go and they did earn a degree, they never got to teach. And they never got their work out there like, say, Robert Merton or Karl Marx. So it was really difficult for these women to have any type of credibility in the field. And that goes to this idea of patriarchy and that education is fundamentally a man's world. Um, a lot of times they would write. You know, Jane Addams, she did a lot of writing on the life of women in urban areas and women that were deviants, if you will. And her ideas were taken and used by a couple of other cats who happened to be white and male. Um, it's messed up, but that's the way they rolled back in the day. And you'll find that now feminist scholars are really kind of outnumbering a lot of male scholars for a number of reasons. But some of the greatest things that have happened in sociology over the past 30 or 40 years have directly come out of the women's rights movement. Jane Addams, however, was living around, she was rolling around in 1800s or the late 18, early 1900s, and she was actually the founder of the Hull House, which tried to help pregnant unwed mothers, what we would term, well, prostitutes, women who were not socially acceptable. And she looked at how society treated them. And then she also looked at how neighborhoods operated, what types of social systems and social interactions take place in certain neighborhoods, and why are they different when you look at this group of streets as opposed to this group of streets. And we're going to come back to Dr. Adams again, as I've said about all of these folks throughout the quarter or throughout the term. So that ends Lecture 1B, and we're going to go on to 1C in just a few minutes.